Thank you. That's great.
So next time your general manager will join, you will tell him early enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to this session, Management Skills for Growth. Peter Drucker said that management is a vital function in society, especially in a situation where Europe is in desperate need for growth and innovation.
You still have an approach to management in Europe which is focused very much on big companies. You have an approach which assumes a very stable economy, and you have an approach which has been, I think, falling behind where it needs to be on the subjects of innovation and entrepreneurship. I think there is an assumption within Europe that innovation is about very high-end innovation. It's about well-endowed scientific research. It's about technological breakthroughs. The most important innovations which I can think of in the 20th century tend to be much more about process, what management thinkers refer to as frugal innovation, which consists actually of stripping out a lot of the sophistication in products. The second area where I think Europe tends to make a terrible mistake is entrepreneurship. Policymakers tend to slip very quickly from talking about entrepreneurs to talking about small businessmen, shopkeepers, and the rest of that. That is not what entrepreneurship essentially means. It's the capacity to revolutionize productive processes, capacity to come up with new ideas, and the capacity quite often to scale very, very rapidly. Europe, I think, also quite often actually aggressively hampers the ability to create innovative companies. So in the United States, you have in Silicon Valley and in every other serious university a huge department which is based upon the idea that you must get professors to commercialize their ideas. This is something that's integral to what universities do. It's very important to their growth strategies. It's very important to the way they manage themselves. Some universities in Europe actually stop this from happening completely, aggressively stop it. That's insane. European policy should be aimed absolutely at creating high growth companies. These are the only ways in which economies can grow, the only ways in which employment can grow, and the only ways in which you can inject some dynamism into the economy. So a huge progress was made in the 1960s in Europe's approach to management. We need another push which focuses very much on the idea of entrepreneurship, very much on the idea of innovation, and very much on the idea of creating high-growth companies in a dynamic economy. Thank you.
Management is actually about managing and leading people. This is a game, not just about growth. It's about cohesion. It's a game about human rights. It's a game about democracy, because true markets cannot be conceived without true democracies. It is estimated that by year 2025, 70% of university students will come from Asia. If we don't open up to these markets, we run the risk of committing harakiri. We need to operate here at both private and public levels and develop many more skills to prompt cross-border mobility of students and attract the best possible talent. We need a more sophisticated form of academics, not just people who produce wise knowledge, but kangaroos who can jump from research into the class and from there to interface with the top management at leading companies. This form of embedded academic can actually bridge the world of academia and business.
We need really to change the mindset of the student, of the professors, but as you nicely stated, also in the business world, to better interact, to build an innovative Europe. To this end, we are driving an interesting experiment at European Institute of Innovation and Technology. We put the knowledge triangle in the center. You need good research and technology. We need higher education, which is mind-opening. And the third thing is we have to tie in existing big corporations, but also small and medium-sized industries that they interlink in this triangle. And in the center is, one more time, the entrepreneur. The executive organs we have been creating, I name them innovation factories. They are just a loose connection of hotspots in Europe which have competence in a field. They include business schools, they include light towers, they include existing industries. We think this is an interesting experiment to learn how you can tear down the walls between the silos. It also only is going to happen if we have capital. This is a real crisis of Europe, that capital going into innovative endeavors and businesses is not really coming because they don't see really these silos being teared down and people speaking to each other and forming groups which really can create value.
How do you, in a systematic way, translate research into value, into innovation? How do you increase productivity?
We are very bad in new innovation cycles. We are very bad in understanding high growth business. The regulatory structures, their mindset is still more connected to past evolution cycles and not to the new revolutionary models.
The management needs to have a new perspective. Those organizations which are able to both capitalize internally and externally on the disruptive connectivity enabled by ICT will be the winners.
The way Schumpeter saw innovation is not as research, and the way he defined innovation is as something carried all the way through to the market. If I look at the resource allocation, whether it's from the public sector or even the new people making effort, I think we're still not going far enough.
I think what we really need is the triangle between research and teaching and the dialogue. But I don't think it's necessarily just a dialogue with business. I would rather say it's the triangle between research, teaching, and the agora. So the society out there. We need an openness to the world to attract the talent. We have to build on what Europe does better than the US, and that is the inclusiveness on the recruitment to the higher education. What do we do with the aging population? We need to be able to accommodate and maybe use, and maybe in the role in the triangle we just talked about, the fact that we have a lot of over 65-year-olds in the future. Thank you.
Denmark in particular has a very, very large public sector, very expensive public sector. And lots of the smart people educated want to get into the public sector. And I was chairing the Danish government's committee, international committee for a new design policy. The idea was there to let the public sector drive innovation. So to really do smart procurement, to try to minimize the damage imposed by EU rules about procurement, and to try to get a few percentage of the budget for new hospitals for innovation. And this was a bit sort of radically rethinking the whole idea, because we're so focused on private enterprise usually.
This is also coming back to Peter Drucker, who was always clear: management and entrepreneurship is by no means confined to business. Voilà. And that's part of a change in mindset that we need at all levels, including policymakers.
Europe is very diverse, and I mean this is in particular if you look at innovation, if you look at entrepreneurship, what we try is really to develop what we call these knowledge alliances, that we have more cooperation between, and okay, let me say companies and higher education institutions, so the education side. And again, there I would not only speak about the for-profit companies. I think I would also speak about, I mean, in the NGOs. You see it happening in some countries, and you see it's still at a very, very early stage in others.
The fact is that there are battles of ideas, and in the US, this notion of commercialization of research has been fought quite heavily. This is not the case in Europe. So we are still in the trenches. When we have a Lisbon strategy, then we have several councils following up. And this is why, as you said, at the end we want to encompass and address all sorts of goals and have, of course, little chance to attain any of them.
If you're sitting in the public sector, the best thing you can do is not to change, because the culture is against that. There's no reward for being innovative. And I think a lot of it is the case in large European companies as well.
We cannot predict the future as we used to do. So again, we need to move a lot more towards experimental thinking. How do we capitalize more on the triple or quadruple play between all the actors, public, private, research, but also the citizens, the civic society, in a new kind of mashup? Unless that happens, we have lost the game.
If you want to move to increase the visibility of management as a critical factor, my strong advice is make a connection between these and job creation, because job creation will become a central issue for the next months in the European Council.
Part of the innovation is unstructured, it's chaotic. So I think it is extremely important to relax a little bit in Brussels and to think, you know, how can we support it when it comes?
We often talk about environments that enable. innovation?
Europe has been very, very good at evolution. Unfortunately, we're in a revolutionary rather than an evolutionary phase of economic development. We've got all sorts of disruptive technologies coming in, most obviously the wireless revolution and the internet revolution, but also I think just around the corner the 3D manufacturing, printing revolution. There's a terrible sort of wish fulfillment about skills. The notion is that if we just have a skilled workforce, we'll be fine. Well, look at Spain. And finally, I think in the minds of policymakers, there's a terrible, terrible tendency towards let's do everything. There are no trade-offs. We can have inclusion. We can have environmentally sensitive growth. We can have everything. And what's more, if you really want to have one of these, you've got to have them all. Smart growth, social inclusion are the product of having entrepreneurial economies in which you can have high growth companies growing very rapidly.
Innovation cannot take place without true freedom. So how many Steve Jobs can we expect to grow, for example, in the Gulf countries or in China? I mean, is there the conditions for freedom, for the real growth of knowledge, of ideas there? So I'm very hopeful about Europe, even if we have to solve many different problems. Focusing on people. Entrepreneurship and innovation is developing leaders and developing the different intelligences in managers. I suggest to explore, this new approach in the development of managers, to introduce in our programs not just the techniques and the traditional modules in management, but bring in the humanities and the social sciences.
I mean, when you say broadening the spectrum, I think we are also talking across disciplines, right? Technology and science and management are in a way silo discipline currently.
We need to open up the silo thinking. Let's create ecosystems within countries, but also between Europe and the emerging countries. Let's link together different players.
We are talking since a long time about making Europe an entrepreneurial society. We have not achieved it. Now is the critical time. I think the important point about management is that it can be taught, and there's research about it. And maybe one of the things we might think about is to have an innovation factory about management. Many people are talking about innovating management at this point, right? That's a real question.